Welcome to Season 2 of Conscious Conversations, where we aim to inspire deep and meaningful interactions that grow into a community of practice that is committed to healing, resilience, and expansion. In this season, our focus is on Africa, the fountain of humanity, the great Mother Africa, a land research is increasingly confirming to be home of the first humans to evolve. Research also confirms that early humans migrated out of Africa into Asia about 2 million years ago and into Europe about 1.5 million years ago. The long and short of it, Africa is where it started. In this season's Conscious Conversations, we speak with spiritual teachers and thought leaders about the ways in which we can unearth the wisdom of the old that calls us back to listen, learn, remember, restore, and heal. I am Mabato Monte. Welcome. African people were uprooted from their long-standing indigenous agricultural way of life, which involved maintaining a harmonious relationship between communities, nature, and traditional religious practices. These practices involved ceremonies, festivals, and rituals in alignment with the cycles of the seasons. Embodied, enacted, and reinforced in these traditions were sacred values communicated between communities and Mother Earth. The community rituals often included agricultural rituals designed to persuade the gods and ancestors to deliver rains and successful harvests and to guarantee healthy livestock. Through colonisation and urbanisation, African people were removed from their way of life, adversely affecting their ability to nurture and protect natural resources in order to ensure food production and sustainability at a local level. In this conversation, I speak with Dr Pama, where we aim to gather insights around how the abandonment of African traditional religious practices among Africans has negatively impacted our abilities to connect with the earth, nurturing a symbiosis between communities, nature, and God. Dr. Pama, also known to many as Baba Songindaba, is an agricultural economist and a business strategist by training, with a master's degree in agriculture, a master's degree in business leadership, and PhD degrees. He has more than 30 years' experience as a civil servant, lecturer, researcher, and agribusiness operator and director of companies. Dr. Pama has served as a member of the Presidential Commission on Rural Financial Services in South Africa. He has served as chairperson on various boards, such as the Board of Land Bank, the Agricultural Research Council, the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market, and others. Sure, that is an incredible career. How are you, Baba?
Thank you very much. I am fine, except that outside it's quite hot, but I'm okay.
It's very, very hot.
Yes.
Your career is very impressive. Please take us through a little bit about who you are and how you got to be where you are in your journey.
Let me start by saying I became an agriculturalist by default because my ambition was to do other things, one of them being medicine, being a doctor. The other one, I was looking at being a scientist. But at Forte, when I was there, I saw an opportunity in terms of bursaries to become an agriculturalist. And I got the bursary because I'm coming from a background, where money was scarce. So I had to take the opportunity of getting the bursary from the Ciskei government then. And I studied BSc Agriculture from 1976 actually to 1979.
Sure. I wasn't even an idea at that
Yeah.
time.
It's quite a long time. Yes. And then having worked briefly as a civil servant, I went on to work at the University of Zululand as a lecturer in cooperative management and administration, which was a diploma I started there at the University of Zululand. I was there for about 2.5 years, after which I got appointed as a principal of Fort Cox College of Agriculture at the age of about 26 years then. Whilst I was there for another 2.5 years, I got promoted to the Department of Agriculture to be a Deputy Director General. Again, I didn't spend much time there. I got promoted to be Director General in the then Ciska administration. I was a Director General for about 5 years. There was in a bit of a skirmish, political skirmish there, a coup by the then Brigadier Gozo, and that's when I left, on an early retirement. Believe it or not, I was 34 years when I retired.
Oh, wow.
And then that's when I started, in NGOs like IDT. Also, eventually, I became a consultant and started my own business. That's basically the background to all these years.
And agriculture, you mentioned that you were drawn to it from a young age. You continued with it in your path. For our listeners who might not know, you also practice as a sangoma, and you have for many years. I'm actually one of your grandchildren. So how have those two merged? Your training as a traditional healer and the work that you do as an agriculturalist?
Being a traditional healer has never been in my plans. Of course, you don't plan it. When I moved from the Eastern Cape to Johannesburg, I started running my own businesses. But at some stage, I identified that there was something wrong that I needed to attend to. That is when I was told, through divination, that I've got to take I've got to respond to the call to become a sangoma. I was not surprised because I'm from a family, both from my mother and my father's side, of spiritual people in terms of being sangomas. I resisted first, but eventually I responded. So I became a sangoma in 2006, 2007. I went for Twasa. Through that process, I spent about 5 to 6 months. And I finished and they took me home, Kotusa, and after that, I started working. Strangely, I became a sangoma whilst I was training, I was also a CEO of our businesses. So that's how the two came together. But it's a long story if I were to explain, how it came true that I should Twasa. But I did. I've been to various places, Mhlabu Lingana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Eastern Cape, trying to find out whether this was actually the case. All of them, without any fail, they said, you have a calling and we have to respond to it. That's how I ended up being a sangoma and a kobela. Now it's almost like 15 years that I've been, and I've trained in excess of 350 to 400 people.
Goodness.
And I've healed in terms of people who are coming with different problems. I've healed in excess of 2,000 people.
Goodness.
And I'm still continuing, although I mix my business with my spiritual work, because these two have to balance if I want to sustain, my life.
So your business, which is predominantly agriculture, and a big part of your life is your spirituality. Are there any intersections between these two worlds, and what have you observed?
Coming to that, I would like to say, although initially I wanted to follow the career of being a medical doctor, I went there at the medical school in Natal. It was the University of Natal at the time. I spent 2 weeks and I couldn't settle. Especially when we have to deal with the corpses, I couldn't settle. That's when I went to Fort Hare. At Fort Hare, I started with BSc. In 2 weeks, again, this opportunity came that brought this bursary, which I needed. So agriculture, I must say that I was driven towards it, through spirituality. I don't think it was my choice. Now, having done agriculture, studied it and worked in it, and now becoming a traditional healer, a Sangoma, these two, I find them to be working very closely and nicely, because when I have to do work relating to my career, it's not a big shift, because agriculture is a spiritual type of an activity.
I like that you say that, and that is something that resonates so much with me. Agriculture is very much related to spirituality, just by looking at how the universe is, I don't know if I should say created. I mean, the air, the soil, which is the earth, and all the other elements that are required to grow anything need nature, right? And I've come to understand that as people, as human beings, our nature is that we are spiritual.
Indeed. If you look at nature, even if you read the Bible, any Bible, it could be Quran, Torah, could be the Christian Bible, but you'll find that nature started, from God, because God created it. And then after that, people came. And then this triangle of God, nature, and people is an important one. Even if you look at various things that are happening around us, you will find that if you break that relationship, there's bound to be a problem. So God created nature, and He wanted to nurture nature, by bringing in people, and He gave them, rules of the game to say, look, you will respect nature. This is how we are going to handle it, and this and that and that. Within that triangle, that's where spirituality comes in. If you don't have, that required spiritual, I would say, possession, you'll find that you don't care much about nature. Sometimes other people, they wouldn't care much about God, and they wouldn't care much about themselves. So that triangle is what life is all about. And what controls it is the spirituality, that brings everything together.
From what I read, African people were aware of this connection between themselves and nature, and of course their sustenance as human beings. And as a result, there were certain rituals or practices they observed in order to nurture that relationship with nature, so that they could, grow vegetables, so that, the livestock could be healthy. What is your understanding around that type of relationship? I know right now it's a bit lost because of colonisation and urbanisation. But what is your understanding of how our forefathers used to live in communion with nature for their own sustenance?
I'll just give one example. If you look at livestock, cattle, it's regarded as the wealth of the African people, also in terms of the families. So a person would have maybe 2 cows, and then those would grow to 10 and so forth. What they would do, they would keep the cows in the kraal. The kraal manure itself is very important in fertilizing, their crops, your maize and so forth. And then the crawl again, that's where you talk to ancestors. Whenever there is any need, there is a ceremony or there's a need to go and talk to them, you talk to them at the crawl, what they call in Xhosa Kanti, which is the gate where you come in. And then you talk there to them. But the interesting thing is that even if the graveyard is closer, but where you talk, it's at the crawl. So that shows you that the crawl with the manure, with the animals that are kept there, and so forth, there is more like a cycle where these come from one to the other. You know, the crawl, the manure would be taken to the fields and to fertilize the plants, to fertilize the soil so that the plants can grow better. And then, just before the start of the planting season, there will be a ritual of going to the river where you go to announce, to the broader ancestors of the family that the planting season is about to start. We ask for rains, we ask for good weather and all of that. All of those are done at the river. Then after that, start preparing the soil, you plant. But that seed that you plant, it's not from the shop or from the co-ops or whatever, because you use the original seed which has been stored and maybe kept in a manner where it won't be eaten by the small animals, your moths and all of that. So when the time comes for hoeing, which is mainly done by women folk, they would go there and do that, but it gets announced and the ancestors are told. The rains would come when the time comes to harvest. Again, there's a ritual that takes place to inform, the ancestors that there will be, harvest. When you harvest, you harvest and then you take the maize or whatever other crop or wheat, put it in a storage. They call it in Xhosa idladla, but it's a storage basically. Put it in there. Then the family starts, allocating it. It's going to be used for the main house, the other houses, and the neighbors who are poor. The neighbors who are poor, they will be given also, maybe 2, 3 to 5 bags of maize. Then they would grind it and eat it as meal and all of that. But if you look at all of that process, it's very clear that the family would follow all of those rituals. When the maize or the wheat or whatever crop is there, it is used, to fight poverty, not only within the family, but the neighbors and all of that, because the neighbors also help when it's the time to weed, the plants. There will be traditional beer that is prepared. There will be slaughtering sometimes of a sheep or whatever. And everybody is happy. So when they go to the river, they pasha there, in other words, talk to the ancestors. That's the form of prayer. Talk to the ancestors to indicate what the situation is, and maybe if there's drought, to ask for rain and all of that. So it's a closely knit process that has got love in it, has got happiness, it has got selflessness, where people don't think about themselves only, they think about everyone. The cattle that are doing the plowing, that are doing the planting, are properly managed with love. You don't ill-treat them. Find that the other animals, like your dogs, they're quite important in the whole process. And everyone is a family. So there's communication with the ancestors, there's communication amongst themselves. all of those things are done within a spiritual context, which is the African way.
In terms of the process of speaking to the ancestors, right? Why do you think that is significant, or what is the significance of communicating with the ancestors? I know there are other healers that are said to be rain queens. For example, they can summon rain. They can communicate with the gods, and then it can rain. Why do you think that is an important relationship, or what is the nature of that relationship?
Firstly, I would like to say that within the community itself, there are leaders, who are handling different aspects of the lives of the community. Within those leaders, you'll find that there are others who are gifted in this way or the other. Those who are gifted in terms of being able, to ask for rain, are known. For example, in Venda, we know that there's a rain queen, and that person has been gifted to do that, by the ancestors and God. So he's a person who can go and plead on behalf of the community to get the rain. So, without spirituality, that person wouldn't be able to do it, whether they like it or not. It's not magic. It is a spiritual gift that is given to the person, and the person would follow up. There are other gifts, that are given. For example, healers, other people would heal, specialize in healing on this and the other. But the most important thing is that it's driven by spirituality. Even the gift of being able to do anything within the community, that's a God-given gift, and through your ancestors, because it's obvious that it can't just come out of the blue. Somebody must have, given that to you, who also got it from the
somewhere.
ones, who were before him.
I like that. It echoes the words of a guest I had on the show, and we're talking about family constellations.
Yes.
And he was saying, nothing comes from nothing, which just really echoes what you are saying, right? So it becomes important to recognize that relationship and the symbolism around it.
It is, yes. That's what I didn't know myself when I got the calling. I thought that the calling is something that comes out of a person, out of your own, interest. You want to find that you get anointed, by your ancestors, maternal or paternal. They will say, so-and-so is the one who's going to take over my work. Whether you like it or not, you will have to do that, because it is more like a relay. One runs for so much and then gives to the other, and then so it happens. It's not supposed to die.
So we see the advancement in South Africa as a good thing, right? And sure, it is a good thing. But in the when one relates South Africa to other African countries, it is the most urbanized, in a sense that we are seeing less and less villages. So more and more people are moving to urban areas where they are most likely going to disconnect with their way of life at home. What do you think urbanization and colonization have contributed to the ability of African people to still observe relationships like that of spirit as well as the earth?
We were taught, to believe that what is called modernization was improving the lives of African people. You were told that, look, your belief systems are not helping you. They are destructive to you. They are antichrist and all such things. But when you look back after you have been driven away from who you are to someone else, when you look back, you find that you have actually been demodernized. In other words, you were modern, you were demodernized in the sense that you were pushed to abandon the sustainable way of life which we had. So urbanization, when you look at it in South Africa, it is nothing else but impoverishment of people. They have to go live their rural areas, go to the mines. They have to go to other industries. They have to go and join farms where they work for other people, living their own land. All of that is within a context of paying them,
in rent,
paying them minuscule wages. They've been moved away from the kraals that we're talking about, where they would communicate with their ancestors. They are put in hostels. If they are having houses, they're given small piece of land. They can't even grow anything there. These people are used to keeping animals. We have indicated that those animals are important in terms of their lives. So all of this urbanization that we see, especially in South Africa, it's destructive, to say the least, because people are taken out of where they should thrive and be sort of like a well-to-do people, and put in areas where they're like slaves. So urbanization it's a problem. Because when you go back to those areas where these people come, nothing is happening there. The lands are not plowed, not cultivated at all. They no longer have animals. The kraals are abandoned. The ancestors who used to reside there are no more there. So these people have been delinked, from their ancestors. What do you expect? You'd expect that people are going to have all sorts of problems and challenges. And they are going to have strange behaviors, others, what you see now, crime, rapes, and whatever. Those are the result of detribalizing people, deculturalizing them in the guise of modernizing them, which is terrible. Even now, when you come to township, you'll find that churches are all over. But those churches don't talk to the spirituality of these people. That is the African people. And now maybe once a year, people are going to go back to where they come from, to Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and whatever. What can you do in a week or two that you were deprived of doing in a year? So that's why we find that people have got serious problems. So urbanization to me is terrible.
It makes me very sad when I think about the state of the lives of Black people. And I think we've become so accustomed to this modern way of life. I really don't know what it's going to take for our people to see that they need to return to themselves in order to be whole again and to actually be human. Because, I go on Twitter in the morning, and when I see what is trending, it's shocking. So I know and I understand the magnitude of the impact it has on African people, on Black people. And it's really, really very sad. Nevertheless, the role of women, earlier you spoke about women being involved in the process. Women are naturally seed carriers because we carry the babies. One almost intuitively knows what to feed your child, what the family needs. Even when the seasons change, so the menu in the home will be different to accommodate the season that we are in. What role did women play in agriculture?
Contrary to some beliefs, or some people's, belief systems, that agriculture is a male-dominated industry. It's not like that, especially in the African context, because in the African context, a family would have pieces of land to cultivate. They would have communal grazing. They would have a garden around the household. And everything that happened there in their fields, let's say 3 hectares, 4 hectares, or maybe acres. And in terms of the animals, they would graze. The animals would graze communally. Women, even from the earliest ages, would participate in that with, let's say, girls and boys would work together in the fields, would work together to looking after the animals, herding, shepherding the animals. Even in terms of the garden, it would be the young boys and girls and young women within the family. So it has been an integrated approach in terms of their involvement. There's never been any exclusion of women in any of those. Some women have been found to be quite strong in terms of their contribution to the family, agricultural activities. Now, when you look at the value chain, you'd find that from primary towards secondary or processing, you'll find that women would be more and more involved in the actual processing, like, grinding of the maize into meal, as well as also utilization of the product, for different types, samp and all of that. So they would be involved. Now, when you look at commercial agriculture as it is, there are many women who are playing, prominent roles within the industry throughout the value chain. No one can say, no, they can't be in this, they can't be in that. And also, when you look at the other, farming support activities, your finance, your marketing, your other activities, women are involved with those too. So, and there's no way that you say you will exclude them. I don't know on what basis, because they're part and parcel. Even in commercial farming, you'll find that the farmer, the male farmer and his wife, kids and daughters, they will be involved in that and make it a success. So it's very important to involve women. But traditionally, even if we look at us when we're still at Fort Hare, doing bachelor's degree, you'd find that women were fewer at some stage, but the numbers improved. Improved. Even today, when you look around, even if you go on Twitter and other social media, a lot of women are leading their own farming activities,
So there's a lot of opportunity there.
There is a lot of opportunity, and we know also of a lot of women who are leading in the various subsectors. The beef industry, a lot of them, they're even involved in breeding. Some, a lot are involved as veterinary doctors, looking after the animals. So I don't think it's accurate to say that women, are not involved or are less involved. It's almost balanced as we speak.
Okay. Whilst we are on the topic of diets and all of that, I've realized that when I eat certain foods, like whole grains, more greens, I find that it's very easy for me to connect to spirit. What contribution do you think our diet or the type of food we eat has on our ability to to be grounded and centered and easily access spiritual beings or ancestor spirits?
That one is a huge topic on its own. Because when you look at plants, you look at animal products, you look at even wild plants, you will find that there are plants that are edible, that you could also prepare as tea, that would help you to improve your connectivity with your ancestors spiritually. For example, Mbepo is one of them. Those people who don't understand, a lot about Mbepo should understand that Mbepo, you can use it as tea. It's a wild plant. You can use it as tea. You can burn it, as an incense. You can even mix it with other things that you eat. So even the type of meat that one uses, although I wouldn't want to discourage people from using any. For example, pork. People say pork, closes your connectivity. I don't believe so, because pork is good. I like it. But the type of food you eat is very important in terms of your connectivity, spirituality, and all of that.
Around the food aspect, when one pahlas or when you go to different ceremonies, you see there's quite a bit of offering of different vegetables and fruits. What is the significance of that?
The spirits, especially, if I were to refer to the African spirits, the old people, the deceased, when you talk to them, you communicate with them, you would want to use what will attract them into the conversation so that there can be communication. So when you go to the river to what we call offering to Hlwaela, you will use things like the teas, the milimilis, and all of that, because that's what they used to use. And those types of food are very important in terms of attracting, them, to come closer and communicate. I've found and I've read also in places like India, they use rice, when they go to the river to talk to ancestors, and burn certain incense. So those types of food are very important. And of course, you'll use a traditional beer, to talk to them. And the belief is that they will, the communication channels will be open, they will respond. And indeed, it does work.
The sustainability issue, particularly around food, is a big one in Africa, in South Africa, especially because of the levels of poverty we see. In agriculture, there's a lot of technology involved. People are finding different ways of meeting the demands of society, which would mean GMOs, right? I personally believe that GMOs obviously have a negative impact on people's health. I mean, you'd look at a 2 kg chicken. The composition on the packaging would say 60% chicken and then other things. What does that mean, and what effect does that have on our health?
Right. GMO, in short, it's a genetic, modification. You modify the genetic, composition of that particular plant or animal so that it can grow faster. And it is really not intended to fight poverty, because those products, when they are ready, will be expensive and inaccessible to the poor in any event. So it is intended to multiply the business as fast and as many times as possible for those who trade in that. So it's really not to fight poverty. It is to increase profits for those who have invested. Now, when you look at, farming, I would say community farming, the way we discussed it earlier on, it is within the abilities of the community and the households there to say we'll grow 2 acres, 3 acres of maize. They use their own seed that they've been using for all these years, because every harvest, the household would keep a certain amount as a seed. So this is coming from years and years and years. So it's well tested and it's resistant to certain diseases and all of that. But the GMO seeds that are sold, commercially, you'll find that they would need certain types of, pesticides, certain types of fertilizer, this and that. If you don't use those, your yield is going to be poor. So GMOs are good for those who want to have super profits, but they're not good for communities who are poor. Now, when it comes to the health issue, a lot has been written. That is why you find that GMOs are now being driven out in terms of advanced or developed countries, because they know that when you modify the genetics, there is a lot that is going to take place there. You destabilize that particular seed, and it is going to cause all sorts of things, hair cancers and all of that. So that's why I was saying the best way to fight poverty is to support people in doing what they have been doing and improve their quantities based on that, without introducing them to GMOs and all such stuff. Now, when you look at broilers, how can you have a 2 kg bird in 5 weeks, 6 weeks? Obviously, a lot of things, have been used to get it, to be 2 kgs. All of those things, when they come into your body, they're definitely going to disorganize a certain element of your body, and there'll be lots of diseases that you find there. So that's basically what is happening. But as a country in South Africa, we have been moved away from doing things the original way, especially Africans, to do things in a so-called competitive world, which doesn't help us much. So what I suspect our government would do is going to say, look, to be able to be seen as a productive country, as an economically dynamic country, let us join them and use GMOs, but it doesn't help the poor.
Do you think they care?
Look, the way our government is structured is not the way our people have lived. Hence, there's a lot of coercion, for people to accept the foreign way of living. And our people, unfortunately, are victims of the situation. And what can we do other than
go back?
Yes,
That's the most inexpensive and simple way,
exactly.
Right? Why do you think it's so difficult for people to embrace who they are, Black people?
As we indicated earlier on, modernization in quotes is what we were introduced to through education, through religion, especially Christianity, and all of that. Even now in places like this in Cape, if you are a tribalistic family doing the things the old way, you are frowned upon as if you are what they call amaqaba, unconverted people and so forth. So most people, I think there's a scramble to become a modern person, a modern family. And that is hitting hard on a lot of people. Because as soon as you leave who you are and want to be somebody else, you're bound to fail. At some stage, you're bound to fail. Even if you were to be rich and get a lot of money, be educated, that's not sustainable. At some stage, your spirits are going to call you to go back and start to be who you are, which is what we're finding, especially when we look at, as Sangoma, look at spirituality of people, issues of identity, issues of cultural activities, doing family cultures, amasiko and all such. It's really hitting a lot of us as Africans.
So, as an agricultural economist, as a healer, as a senior citizen, as a PhD holder, as a scholar, what do you think Africa can offer the world if we were to go back to our nature as Africans? Because I think, as you say, countries want to be globally competitive. It's in the interest of certain institutions and so on. But I think the costs are so high. We look at the past 30 years since the change of government, and we haven't really seen much progress other than tall buildings and lots of malls. But I think the quality of life of most South Africans has deteriorated, if anything. If we were to go back to who we are as a people, what do you think we could offer the world?
I think the first thing that is important, even when you play sport, especially things like soccer or rugby or any other sport that is competitive globally, you shouldn't play according to how those other people play. You must play according to your own gifts and capacity. Because if you want to play like what the Americans play, they will definitely outcompete you. It's the same thing as life in general and culture in particular. If you want to deal with others in the world, deal with them according to what you are able to do best. Don't want to do things the way they do them and think that we are going to compete successfully. Look at the Chinese. The Chinese were fortunate in that they were never deculturalized. They were never detribalized. Their way of life, their belief system was never invaded. They were never converted to be anybody else other than themselves. Indians, the same. Now, when you look at those countries now in terms of their competitiveness with the world, they compete as themselves. And the Americans are worried, for example, about the Chinese, because the Chinese are not competing according to the style or the way of doing things. Yeah. So with us, unfortunately, I would say almost like 99% of what we do is based on the strength of other people and not our strength. Hence, even our economy is weak. We could have gold, we could have diamonds, we could have platinum. The way we trade in those, I would say lucrative minerals is on the terms of other people, not on our terms. So there's a huge, huge task ahead of us. And sometimes I believe that the Department of Culture and what do they call it? Department of Culture and
I don't know what's the full name, but yeah.
That department, when it was established, it should have been established to work day and night to take our people back to who they are. I'm not so sure if they're doing that. Even if you look at the African traditional healing systems, that's a huge, a gift that we should be using as Africans because it works. But we frown upon it and believe in what the West gives us. As a result, we're nothing, even in terms of our religion. We worship according to what others do. As a result, we are converts all over. We find Africans are converts of so-and-so. I mean, if you're a convert of somebody, obviously you're going to be under that person. So, to me, it's a difficult one. I'm not so sure how we are addressing it in our own way. People like you, me, who understand where the problem is. But the majority, even within families, my own family, some people are converts who believe, so dogmatically in foreign belief systems. What can you do? Schools. Our children in schools are taught from very early ages that your language, your culture is nothing. We're going to grow you to a better culture, to a better language,
which is whiteness.
Yeah, it's a problem. So it's a major problem. And even our political system, we are now fighting. Parties are fighting each other based on foreign ideological systems to say no, and you are this and that. But no one really argues about our Africanness. What is it that we can do so that we can go to the world stage and show them who we are? If we have to compete, obviously they'll find it difficult to beat us because we know our game. But we play them according to their game.
And, what you're saying is so important because immediately what comes to mind is our indigenous plants are ways of healing. There's so much illness in the world. And I think during COVID, so many people started using umhlonyane, started using this and that, steaming, footering, which is something that has been looked down upon. But then because there was a crisis, people went to it. In terms of health or the medicine space, what are your thoughts around modernizing African medicine or what we know to make it, and not modernizing in terms of turning it into tablets, right? But in their raw form, having our medicines in mainstream healthcare. Why are we not doing it? Because we've seen how much it works. You told me about a story where a person whose foot was like literally rotting, started taking your capsules and he got better. So why are we not seeing more integration of our African medicines and herbs in the healthcare space?
It comes back to what I've just said. In households, I would use my own grandmother's household, maternal grandmother, because I used to be there most of the time. She had a garden, and a lot of plants in the garden were like umhlonyanes and other types. And she would give you, even if you had no flu, as a preventative measure. So it means...
like a vitamin.
Exactly. So it means she had the know-how of sustaining a family. But all of those things have been abandoned, and now we take our kids to clinics. Look, I don't have a problem with the clinic as long as it was integrated into the way of our life. There are many other types. Those capsules I was talking about, is 4 herbs there that we have mixed in there. One of them is very bitter, so we had to put it into capsules. Those 4 herbs are known for different elements in terms of health. One is good in cleaning the blood, one is good in fighting this and that, but those are herbs. But even now, when you say to educated people or modern people that, look, there's something that's herbal that we could be given, you find that people, they don't believe in that.
But they're happy to take green tea.
Yes, yeah. They don't believe in that. For example, even when you look at, even food itself, you will find a lot of white people use the herbs, your colleagues and this, when they cook their food. But with us, we don't anymore. When in fact, that's what we used to do, in the past. So we need to educate people even about herbs, because if you use herbs in your food, use herbs in your teas, chances of you getting attacked by opportunistic diseases are very slim. But we don't do it. But COVID did, in a way, change a lot of minds of people. Because eucalyptus, for example, people see a lot of eucalyptus around, but they wouldn't do anything about it. White oak, which is all over, I've got it even in my yard. If you use white oak, a bark, there's a lot that you can do, to fight. Moringa. Why can't we have each home having maybe at least 2 moringa trees? Because moringa, can fight about 45 diseases.
Oh, wow.
And it's also very easy to grow. But that's what I think our government should be doing. Just getting basic things, to people, moringa trees, give each family 2. We have eucalyptus, give them to, then we have got, you have got your hlonyane, mpepo, very important. Each family should have at least 3 plants of mpepo, so that they can use it as tea, they can wash with it. It's also good, other people use it they process it into soap. So, those things, they don't cost the billions that we hear government talking about. They are cheap, but they don't do them. The ones that are billions, you don't see their impact. The ones they spend billions on. So
it's really an issue of not having the willingness, right?
Exactly.
I'd like you to address the issue of food insecurity in South Africa, in Africa, although we've spoken briefly about it. But I don't think climate change is child's play. I don't think it's a joke. We are seeing it every day in our weather conditions. How can we address the issue of food insecurity in Africa or in South Africa?
As I've indicated, food insecurity was introduced into the African communities by the colonies, apartheid masters and all of that, because people were moved from what they used to do best. In other words, that household farming, that the family was participating on, and they're producing enough for themselves and for the neighbors, as well as take to the market. Sometimes you're grinding your maize, selling it to other people. So when they got dislodged from that and pushed, towards urbanization, that's when food insecurity started. So, even chickens, families used to keep 10, 15 chickens, and they would slaughter one, time and again, for the family, so that they can get proteins and all of that. Also green plants, they used to grow those within their yard, their gardens and so forth. So they would store surplus maize, so they had food throughout the season until the next season, and then they would start the cycle again.
I think that the fundamental principles of that, for me, would be not consuming in excess, right? So if you have 10 chickens, you're relying on the chickens for eggs, for instance, and then also for protein. But it also meant that you're not going to slaughter a chicken every day, right? So you're not going to have meat every day.
Definitely.
So our people did not consume more than what was required. And it also means they had a diverse nutritional diet.
Definitely, the households, they knew what to prepare for when. Meat was not eaten every day. I also, got exposed to that in the Transkei, where my parents, they sent me there to stay there for a year, studying there. So I got to be exposed to that. They had a plan in terms of eating. They knew best, what is good for when. So there was enough food. No one had insecurity in terms of food. But at the same time, they planned very well. They knew start of the season, this is what we'll do, and harvest. And then next season starting at this time and all of that. So there was never a problem of shortage of food. But when men were moved to the mines, and because men are needed in terms of certain types, and also money to start doing these things, to plow, plant, and all of that became scarce. And then the family would get money maybe once in 6 months. That's when things started to be a problem. So food insecurity is something that was introduced, and it could be reversed, one way or another. The second one, again, comes to this one of climate change. Climate change does not only affect those who cause it. It affects everyone within that environment. So now, if you look at, even now, when you look at outside, the sun is so hot, that you can't believe it could be this hot at this time. In the past, it used not to be like that, but there's been disturbance of the way nature is, resulting in climate change. And climate change, again, is a problem when it comes to planning, because you will plan according to seasons, but things that never happened in those seasons are happening now, and creating shortages of food and prices going up. The price of food is going up, astronomically at this stage. And I don't think people will in the future afford to buy food. So that's what causes food insecurity. But the best way really is to gradually take people back to where they used to be, and then through that you could fight, poverty and hunger.
You spoke about cycles. Nature has a cycle, right? Everything has a cycle. And I think it's one of the things that we forget to remember in our everyday life. We see young people becoming more and more obsessed with instant gratification, wanting success now, and as a result, getting themselves into situations that are not very productive or useful for them. And I think it mostly has to do with the fact that we forget that everything in nature operates through a cycle, right? Cycles helped us to understand how or when we could grow what. Nowadays, even if it's not winter, we see oranges and nachis in the stores. There's a particular store that comes to mind, which I will not mention. What do you think consuming food or products that are not aligned with the seasons or the cycles of nature, what impact do you think that has on us, if at all?
Firstly, with globalization, you'll find that that those cycles, have been disturbed because let's take grapes, table grapes. Table grapes in our country, you'll find that they are ready around about November, and then that's the time that we harvest those. And then when you go to the other half, let's say June, July, you find that there should be scarcity of those because we are not harvesting at that time. But we import, and those will come from other countries in the north. And then it means we will have continuous availability of that particular product. If, for example, that product is too much in terms of sugars, according to the seasonality of those products, we would have time of not having that product and having less of that problem of sugar and all of that. But because we have these all the time, because of globalization and all of that, find that our bodies are not rested. Because if we don't have grapes, we should be having something that is that complements the grapes. So that's why we find that our bodies are exhausted with all of these because there's no time to rest them. I like grapes, but having grapes all the time, it's detrimental, and even with the other stuff. So the way the world has changed and is working now is to our disadvantage, but to those who make money, out of that, there's no season, because when it's off season with grapes, they get them from elsewhere. When they produce the grapes, it's on season for them, they export it too. So that's how it happens, which is unfortunate. But it's nice in the short term, but in the long term, it's a problem. Because all these seasons, God created them for a reason, and man now is manipulating those for money. And what can we do?
In closing our conversation, the seasons, the cycle of life, also can be seen in human life, right? What would you say around that? So it's nature, the cycles of nature, and our ability as individuals to observe that and to work within that framework. What opportunities lie there?
Opportunities, I would say, if our season, let's say summer, gives us maize and this and the other types of crops, as well as the animals, because animals, they tend to thrive during certain seasons. For example, beef animals won't thrive that much in winter, but in summer, especially if they graze from natural grazing. So the opportunity there is for us to utilize nature according to what it is and work with it and work according to its guidelines. That is an opportunity. And it gives us a competitive advantage over the other people elsewhere who are having an opposite of what we have at that time. So if we worked with the nature in terms of seasons and all of that, we would have a competitive advantage all the time. And would also impact nature less negatively. Now, the other very important point, that I would like to raise is that we find that we use tunnels, these plastic tunnels, so that we can manipulate the climate and all of that. That's good for cash and profits and all of that. But it's not good for the carbon,
footprint.
Carbon footprint of our area. It's going to change everything, and then carbon emissions are going to get out of control and all of that. So, in terms of doing things the way you should do them, it is more sustainable. But in terms of rushing for more money, more profits, we tend to do things differently. So, if we play right, things would be okay. But because we are in a world that is competitive in terms of what we do when, we tend to manipulate things, and things will turn against us. So that's where the problem is. Where do you want to play is what is important.
So understanding your values, what you value most, and leaning on that.
Exactly.
In terms of cycles of nature, I think for me, I've also learned that in my personal life, it will not always be happy, everything is great and, there's excess and, but one should also understand that in our personal lives, there is a season for planting, for harvesting, for resting, so we can reflect on what we have achieved, on what we want, right? That's nature. Now, we've lost that. So we are no longer as reflective or not in alignment with nature. And as a result, there's so much unhappiness in people's lives. What do you think about that?
Because our lives have been so much commercialized, we are always in a rush to have more and more of this money that's circulating. You may have it, but the problem is that it's not going to be sustainable. You could have a lot of it, but you are going to lose a lot of things that you are not going to be able to control. So, going back to what we said when we started, there's God, there's nature, there's ourselves. Within it, the spirituality. Spirituality is such that we are not driven by material things, to maximize profits, maximize this money and all of that. If you are spiritual, you are going to be guided by saying, how much of this should I have? Have I not reached the ceiling? And so forth. But if you are not driven by spirituality, there's no ceiling. You just
want more and more and more and more.
That's where the broilers are coming from. You now are growing a chicken in 6 weeks, but now they're even wanting to do it in 4 weeks. So it means you've got to push in a lot of these undesirable chemicals within those animals and still feed people. So we're shortening our lives, but happily so.
Unaware
yes.
as well. Baba, any words of encouragement? Surely, I believe in hope. And I read a quote by Steve Biko where he was saying, we must not be destroyed by the hardships of life. I'm paraphrasing, but we must always have a hope. What would you say as some sort of encouragement? I know it looks gloomy.
It looks gloomy, but there's a lot of hope, especially if we could look back to how our parents, grandparents, and other people before us, how they used to survive with little. For example, I always say to people, my grandmother used to get about 10 rand, 5 rand a month then, but was looking after about 20 grandchildren, comfortably so. But now, we go to somebody who's getting 15,000 rands a month. Of course, there's inflation involved, who can't look after his or her own 2 kids. So things are terrible because we get ourselves trapped into this expensive life, expensive way of doing things and all of that. If we were to go back and be simple, that's why I like Bungoma. Bungoma, takes you back to the basics of life. And if you stick to those, even what you wear, You don't have to wear designer clothes, when you're at a Sangoma. Of course, designer clothes are good, but they must not control you. Because if they do, you spend money day in and day out and have no money. But as a Sangoma or as a traditional person, you use good traditional attire and have money to do other things and so forth. So why we suffer is because we put ourselves under pressure, to be competitive, with other people. And at the end of the day, even if we have got 1 million or 2, by the day you have to live, you have to die. You want to live those things. But you lived a life that was not self-preserving, a life that was self-destructive. So there's hope in the sense that there are more and more people who understand, this ancestral type of living, where out of a little, source of income, you do much more impactful things and so forth. So there is hope. I see a lot of people, over the weekend I was with a family that were doing, their rituals and ceremonies to go back to who they are, not who they are known to be, in terms of identity and all of that. And it was a good thing, and I saw a lot of hope within that. So many people are going back, and many people are looking at themselves in a different way, not looking at themselves in this way of moving away from who you are in a fast pace and wanting to be somebody different to who you are. So there's hope.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with us. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was my pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I truly hope you learned something new, felt something, and were inspired to cultivate a more conscious life. I'd love to connect with you, hear your thoughts and story. Please feel free to reach out. Our contact details can be found on montcm.co.za.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.